Hey everybody, before I get started, I just want to mention a couple of ways that you can engage with me on a more personal level. I have a few avenues set up and I keep focusing on one, and I figured, why don't I make a short little video talking about all of them real quick before we get into these episodes. So first thing, Patreon. There's a link in the episode description and every episode description to the Patreon, as well as a video on the feed called Major Announcement that has all the details of what each tier offers and how much they cost. I implore you to check that out. I offer a lot of cool shit for my patrons. Second thing, the Discord channel. There's also a Discord link in the episode description and in every episode description. I have multiple channels set up there for each show that I'm covering, and it's a great way to just engage with me. I have a channel set up for MMA talk as well. I'm a big MMA fan, so if you're an MMA fan, you can check that out as well. There's a link to the Discord in the episode description. And then lastly, the Facebook and Twitter. Social media. Follow me on there. I post news on there. When I say news, I mean like, hey, I'm stopping covering this show. Hey, I'm starting covering this show. Let me know what you think about this. I do live watches of things on Facebook where like I'll check in and say, I'm watching so-and-so show. And then I'll like live comment while I'm watching it. And that'll be cool if maybe you watch that show too and you want to watch along with me, or you're watching it later and you will see my thoughts, which are usually pretty entertaining because I'm usually pretty high when I'm writing them. So check out all those links in each episode description, and let's talk about this episode. Peace.
One mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to One Mic, and today I'm here to talk about Season 1, Episode 7 of HBO's The Last of Us, entitled Left Behind. Apparently this episode title is named after the DLC that this episode is based on. So for those who may not be aware, DLC means downloadable content. It's basically extra shit you can get on a video game after you buy it. Like you got your base video game, and then sometimes DLC comes out, shit that you can download. There might be new stories like this that you get to experience. So that's what the episode title is based upon. I want to start by just kind of giving general thoughts because I thought this was a solid episode, but for me, it's probably the least of the 7 that we've seen so far. And again, I know people like to act like any season of any television show, you're gonna have a best episode and you're gonna have a worst episode. The worst episode isn't necessarily a bad episode. It's just the other 9 are better. And that's logic. That's math. Like there's no way around that. There's going to be a best episode. There's going to be a worst one. They can all be A+ episodes, but some are just going to be better than others or more enjoyable than others. And this one is probably the least of the 7 to me. Like I said, not because it's bad or anything like that. It's a good episode, but I've now, I think, become accustomed to this formula that I think they've been kind of doing on this show. So these big moments, the big moments that we have in this episode didn't quite land for me, and thus the build-up to them had less of an impact as well. So to give you an example, when I said about the formula for this episode, I think we've all kind of realized now that not necessarily every episode is going to be like this, but you're going to get a lot of these individual stories where Ellie and Joel end up at a location and they have an experience in this episode with new characters who we're meeting. We're going to have these backstories that are going to fill in some of these people's traumas that they've experienced prior to. And that's going to help us understand how they're operating present day. These things are going to happen. But, we've already had the Bill and Frank episode, which I think this one mirrors a bit too closely. And I think that even harms this episode a bit because we've already seen, kind of seen this dynamic already. But we saw it, I would say, not just better, but from start to conclusion. And I'll talk about that later in the video as well. And even the Henry and Sam episode from like 2 weeks ago that told their story, that one that ended in tragedy, that was another one where it had kind of the same setup. It was just like, okay, we didn't meet them in that episode. We met them at the very closing shot of the previous one, but we met them in this episode. We learned their story. We learned who they are. We learned why Kathleen hates them. All this kind of shit, right? And then it ends in an incredibly shocking way that we could not have seen coming. But when it becomes clear that this episode is a flashback to Ellie's past, and that she has a crush on this girl, Riley, we know it's going to end with Riley's death, right? So, We didn't have that with the Bill and Frank thing. We're like, I don't even know like why I'm seeing the Bill and Frank story at the time, right? And then we don't know how the Henry and Sam thing is going to conclude either. And again, this has nothing to do with like having played the game or whatever. Like if you played the game, you might have known those things, but I'm only talking about the show. I didn't know what the Bill and Frank thing, I didn't know where that was going. I didn't know that the Henry and Sam story was going to end the way it did, but I knew very early on how this one was going to end. And like that was a combination, like if I hadn't already had the Bill and Frank episode and the Henry and Sam episode, like if this one was early, this is the first of those three, this one's going to work way better. But when now I understand, like, okay, this show is about heartache, this show is about trauma, this show is about loss, all of those things, right? I know when we're flashing back to this relationship that Ellie and Riley are building, I know how this is gonna end. And like I feel like knowing the end result made the path there a lot less compelling. We had, like I said, we had no idea where Bill and Frank goes, Henry, Sam. So when those ended with the deaths of those characters, and we come to understand the importance of everything we saw leading up to it, the impact of those moments is way, way stronger. And when you realize very early on in this one that it's about to be another backstory with another tragic ending, it's a less enjoyable experience. Again, for me, it was a less enjoyable experience, and more of you just kind of, you being me, more of you just kind of waiting to get to what you already know is going to happen. It's kind of like, okay, like I wasn't looking at my watch or anything, but I'm sitting there like, okay, all of this is meant to inform me on the relationship between Ellie and Riley, but in the back of my head, I know Riley's going to die at the end of this episode. That's not something that was present in the Henry and Sam episode and in the Bill and Frank episode. And I think like you know, the path to get there, I'm not trying to say that it doesn't matter. It does, and there's a lot of great stuff here. I just think that knowing the end result made the path less interesting, and that's why this episode was probably the least impactful of the 7 for me anyway, so far. So this one opens with us learning that Ellie has somehow gotten Joel to an abandoned house. He feels like he's about to check out, and he's like, you know, just leave me. It's go. You need to stay safe. You need to get to the Fireflies. All this kind of shit. You go ahead. And she starts to do that. She starts to leave. But that's when the flashback hits, and she's about to leave, and that's where most of the episode takes place, is in the flashback. So we flash back to Ellie. She's at like a military school for Fedra, I guess. And her best friend Riley, who is played by Storm Reed, who I mainly know is Rue's sister on Euphoria, but I know Storm Reed's done a bunch of stuff. Riley has been missing for 3 weeks. And I can't even necessarily say missing. She just hasn't been back for 3 weeks. And so Ellie's been concerned about her. She doesn't know where she is, doesn't know if she's okay, whatever. Riley shows up in the middle of the night and informs Ellie that she's joining the Fireflies, which is a kind of a conflict of interest when you're at federal military school. But because of this conflict of interest here, she wants to take Ellie out for the best night of her life. Now, it's worth remembering here that Ellie was born post, I keep calling it pandemic, I don't know what else to call it, post-infection-demic, I don't know, but she was born post-pandemic, so this trip to the mall that probably doesn't seem like a big deal to any of us is a very unique experience for Ellie, and I think we're also meant to understand the Herculean amount of thought, effort, care that Riley put into this date. And make no mistake, that's what this is. Like, very early on, it's very clear this was a date. Whether the two of them want to believe it or not, they want to pretend like, oh, we're just friends hanging out. That was a fucking date. And there are several moments that I think are kind of meant to inform us of this. The fact that she brought the $5 for the photo booth ahead of time. Again, the preparation, right? She was prepared for the cost of the arcade. We see them play Mortal Kombat, which we know is a big deal for Ellie. You know, even earlier in the episode, there was like a Mortal Kombat poster on her wall. We know about Melina, all this kind of shit, right? The gifting of the pun book that we know will be behind a nice moment for Joel and Ellie. Joel and Ellie in the future, but it's in the past for us, the viewer. But we know for Ellie, it's in the future. She gets gifted that book from Riley, which now even gives a little bit even more weight to the pun book and how that helped bond Joel and Ellie. There's a little bit more weight to that now that we know where that book came from and how much Riley meant to her. And eventually Ellie finds the bombs that Riley's been making. I say and as if this is like the next piece of evidence that that Riley put a lot of effort into this date. there's no and. I'm moving topics. Eventually, Ellie finds the bombs that Riley has been making, and despite all of the evidence that I just gave about how much effort and care Riley put into this date, Ellie incorrectly deduces that this was never about her. Again, I don't know how the fuck she landed there, but because like, oh, you made bombs, so this was never about me. Like what? But only thing I can guess is that maybe she looked at it as like, this was like a setup for like a Firefly recruitment. Like, you're not actually trying to have a date with me. You're just trying to butter me up so you can get me to join the Fireflies. That's the only thing I can think. But I don't know how you experience everything that Ellie experienced up to that point, see some bombs on a shelf and go, this was never about me. Like, what? But anyway, Ellie decides to leave, and that's when we learn that Riley's been ordered to go to Atlanta by the Fireflies, and she's leaving the next day. So this is their last time together, and that's why Riley made this whole night so special. Ellie starts to leave, and now we're connecting the two timelines, right? Ellie starts to leave just as she did with Joel in the opening scene, but she comes back, and they dance in masks. There was a little the whatever it was, the toy or machine or whatever it was that made this screaming sound that brought Ellie back in the first place. Like I said, they dance in these Halloween masks. They're playing music on her Walkman. Riley asks her to stay. She quickly agrees. Like, there's no thought in it or whatever. They kiss. It seems very much a happily ever after kind of moment. Until an infected dude that we saw earlier in the episode comes up, attacks them, and ultimately he ends up biting both of them, which again should have been think about how last week when Joel got into the fight with the Raider, and he overpowers the guy, kills him, but then we find out he's been stabbed. It's like, oh fuck. The excitement or the nervousness or whatever you might have been feeling in the moment with Joel and the Raider last week has to be completely absent from this scene, because we know, like, again, if you've been paying attention, you should know that both of them are going to end up getting bit. Like, I deduced that. I'm like, okay, well, I know Ellie survives. I know Ellie was bit. She's not infected. I know Riley ain't around. Ellie's talked about, like, all of these things. I know Riley ain't going to make it out this episode. So when this infected person attacks, I'm like, okay, this is probably where Ellie gets bit, and this is probably also where Riley gets bit, and she ends up dying, Ellie ends up living, whatever the case may be. So when that attack happens, I'm not sitting there like, oh my God, what's gonna happen? I'm like, all right, like, especially after Ellie kills them, I'm like, okay, here's gonna be the late oh shit, I got bit reveal, which they've already gone to that well with the revealing of the stabbing, and then I think, and with the revealing of the bite on Sam. So again, like, things that were effective earlier in the season that they've already gone to, they try to go back to those same concepts and things for effect in this episode, and it just did. Like I said, it didn't work. I already knew they were gonna get bit. So they do the late reveal. It's kind of like, all right, well, I already knew that. And it's not even like I already knew that because it was obvious. That's one of the reasons I already knew that. But the other reason I already knew that is because they already employed that same tactic twice before with these kind of like reveals of like, oh shit, this person was harmed. Just like they've already done before, these backstories that end in tragedy. So like, they've gone to the well of certain things 3 times now, and that happens in this episode. And I think, again, reiterating the point, just kind of driving it home, that's why this episode didn't land for me the way the other 6 have. But I did love the way Ellie reacted to her bite. It wasn't like oh my God, I can't believe I'm gonna die. It was more like the pain, like her pain and her trying to like wipe it off of her arm. It felt like exactly what it was. This kind of like, just when I finally get to the point I've been wanting to get to with Riley this whole time, as soon as we get there, it's taken away. Like at the very moment, like we kiss, everything's perfect. I feel like this is the perfect moment in my life, and I don't even get 10 fucking minutes to enjoy it before I have to get hit with the fact that now we're both gonna die. And Bella Ramsey, I think, did a great job of portraying that, and not just the simple, oh shit, I got bit, now I'm gonna die. Like, that very much felt like, are you serious? Like, that's what that felt like. And I thought she did a great job with that, Bella did. And then we don't see what happens, but we don't need to. We know what happens. We know that Riley's gonna die. We know that Ellie is not. I'm on the fence regarding whether or not I wish that we did see what happened. Like I said, I don't think we need it, but it might have enhanced the episode just to see how it played out and how Ellie ultimately ended up with Marlene. Because like we're gonna kind of we can again deduce that Marlene is gonna, well, we don't have to deduce, we know Marlene is gonna somehow end up with Ellie. How do we get to that point? Are we gonna get another flashback? Are we gonna pick this up from the Riley moment? Like, let's say for instance, before, let's say Riley turns and she starts to attack Ellie, and then just as that happens, fireflies come in, one of them being Marlene, and she shoots the Riley zombie and then takes Ellie. Okay, so let's say that that's what happens, and we see that in the next episode, we see that in the finale. That's not gonna have as much of an emotional impact then as it would have if that's how they ended this episode. So again, just like me, I feel like I'm being a little bit nitpicky, but at the same time, I just feel like it would have been a little bit more impactful to have it at the end of this episode. So, I mean, that's my general thoughts on this episode. I don't know if you guys are going to be in line with that or not. You know, like I mentioned in one of my other videos, I don't check for other people's thoughts before I give mine. I don't want that to impact how I feel, especially because I don't want to sit here in front of you guys and say something because other people have said it and I just want to match them or whatever. And then now a year down the road, when it's okay to feel something different about this, and now I'm looking like, oh, I said I love that thing, but I really didn't like it. I was just going along with the flow. I'm not that kind of dude, so I don't know how people are feeling about this episode, but I'm curious if people feel the same way that I did. And like, this was a good episode of television. It just wasn't up to par with the previous 6, and I think that's because what they went for, even though it worked and it was effective, it wasn't as effective because they've already gone to these wells a couple of times before. So now I know where we're going. Now I know where this is headed, and now it's the emotional impact of it is gone. So that's my thoughts. Let me know what you guys think. I will see you guys next week for episode 8, which is the penultimate episode. There's 2 left, I believe. There's 9 in this first season. I will see you guys next week for episode 8, and until then, peace.